Now we're up to the Mishnah on the bottom of Daf Lamed Amid Aleph. Shlosha ach shnai mehem nesuim l'shtei achios v'echad nasu l'nochos. So we have Reuven, Shimon, and Levi are brothers. Reuven and Shimon married two sisters. Reuven is married to Rachel, Shimon to Leah, and Levi is married to Sarah, who's not related to neither Reuven's wife nor Shimon's wife, neither to Rachel or Leah. Geresh echad mibali ha'achios is ishto. One of the two brothers divorced his wife. Let's say, for example, Reuven divorces Rachel, umeis, and nasu l'nochos. Nasu l'nochos is referring to Levi, who's married to Rivka. So now what's critical here in this Mishnah is that Reuven divorces his wife Rachel. And that's going to have an impact on this whole scenario because Rachel would be a potential tzara to Sarah. And the reason for that is because the Mishnah says, Umeis hanasu l'nochris. That means that Levi, who's married to Sarah, dies, and therefore Sarah falls for Yibum, in this case to Reuven and Shimon. Is Reuven's, if Reuven is miyabem Sarah, which he has no problem doing because Sarah is not related to his wife Rachel, or shall we call it his ex-wife Rachel. But the point is that at one point in time, Reuven was married to Rachel. And now that Reuven is miyabim Sarah, we have to analyze the status of Sarah. So the Mishnah says, Uknos hamagaresh. So Reuven, who divorced his wife Rachel, now is miyabim Sarah Eshes Levi after the death of Levi umes. Now, when Levi dies, no, excuse me. Levi had already died. He didn't die twice, sorry. And Reuven had been Yabim Sarah, the wife of Levi. Now Reuven dies, and his wife Sarah falls for Yibum to Shimon. Shimon is married to Leah. So now the question is, can Shimon be Yabim Sarah? And offhand, the answer is yes. There should be no problem. The only issue that one could possibly raise is that at one point in time, Rachel was married to Reuven. So when did the get take place? When he severs his relationship with Rachel, it was before Levi had even died. And certainly it was before Reuven was miyabem Sarah Eshes Levi. So it doesn't seem that Sarah would have the status of a tzaras erva. And the Mishnah concludes by saying, Zohi sha'amru, the kulon shemesu on his garshu tzarasei mutaros. This is the first Mishnah in Masechet Yevamos, and the Mishnah establishes a principle that if there was an erva and she received a get, or she died, so in either event, the relationship with her husband terminated, and now her tzara is no longer a tzara. Again, the Gemara is going to focus later on the words v'zohi, which is some sort of a mute. But in this case, sarasei mutaros, and as we apply that to the case of our Mishnah, it means that Shimon can be miyabim tzara. Sarah is not a tsaras erva, even though Sarah was married to Levi, and so was Rachel, who is Shimon's wife's sister, was also married to Reuven. So in a sense, Reuven was married to Sarah, and now he dies, and Sarah falls for him to Shimon. And Reuven was also married to Rachel. So does Sarah take on the status of Tsaras Erva because Rachel was an Erva to Shimon? And the answer is no. And the reason for that is because the Gerushin took place early enough to sever the relationship between Reuven and Rachel such that Sarah didn't overlap at all with Rachel. So even though Rachel herself is an erva to Shimon because she is the sister of his wife Leah, but nevertheless that has no impact on Sarah at all. Now, if we're careful about reading the Mishnah, we see that the Mishnah went out of its way to emphasize that the Gerushin took place early. So the Gemara is medayik. Taima, the reason why Sarah falls for Yibum to Shimon, and she's not a Tzaras Erva, is the Geresh, because Reuven delivered a get to his wife Rachel. The Achakach mes, and then subsequently Levi died. Levi, who's married to Sarah, died. And Reuven was miyabem Sarah Ashes Levi. So at the moment that Sarah falls for Yibum, right, and then we have to add another point that Reuven himself died, and his wife Sarah falls for Yibum to Shimon. At that point that Sarah falls for Yibum to Shimon, Sarah is not a Tzaras Erva. And when Reuven was miyabem Sarah after the death of Levi, Sarah was not married to Reuven at the same time that Rachel was married to Reuven. So we could not classify Sarah as a Tzaras Erva. She didn't share the same husband at any moment in time together with Rachel. Aval mes, the Achakach Giresh, let's say that Levi, who's married to Sarah, had died at the very beginning, and Sarah, Ashes Levi, falls to Yibum in front of Reuven and Shimon. And Reuven and Shimon are married to, respectively, to Rachel and Leah, who are sisters. So at this moment in time, there's a zikas yibum of Sarah to Reuven as a result of Levi's death. And if we view and define that zika as a kind of a marriage relationship, she now becomes a tzara to an erva. And v'yaka giresh, even though later on Reuven delivers a get and divorces his wife Rachel, nevertheless asura. Again, the word asura here means that if Reuven is miyabem Sarah after the death of her husband Levi, And after Reuven was miyabem Sarah, he dies, and Sarah falls for Yibum to Shimon. Sarah, in that case, has the status of a tzaras erva because Reuven delivered a divorce to Rachel after the zikas Yibum between Sarah and Reuven. So Reuven is married to Sarah at one point in time. He hasn't yet delivered a divorce. And at that moment, with Levi's death, Sarah falls for Yibum to Reuven. So now Reuven, in a sense, is married to both Sarah, Ashes Levi, and Rachel, his original wife. And that might give Sarah the status of a tzaras erva. And that's where the Gemara's medayik asura, that in that case, where the gerushin took place and Reuven divorced Rachel after Levi had already died and Sarah was kuka, she had a zikas yibum to Reuven, in that case, asura, Rachel could not be misyabemes to Shimon, who's married to Leah, because Rachel, who's the sister of Leah, is an erva to Shimon, and her Sarah at one point in time was Sarah. Now again, the chiddush is a great chiddush here in this deal. I mean, halacha that derives from this, because at the time that Reuven was miyabem Sarah, Rachel was way out of his house, long gone from his house. He had divorced her. And therefore, it would seem to be very difficult to assume that Sarah would have the status of a tzaras erva because of Rachel, when Rachel was long gone before Reuven was miyabem Sarah. But again, the diuk of the Gemara is excellent. The svara we have to understand. The svara that Wudo would not help us understand the derivation, but the method by which we derive this conclusion seems to be very solid. In other words, if the Mishnah is trying to tell me a chiddush that Sarah falls for Yibum, and there will be Yibum, she's muteres for Yibum, then tell me even in a case where Levi had died before the gerushin of Reuven to Rachel. That would have been a bigger chiddush, that even though at the time of the Zika of Sarah for Yibum, with the death of Levi, Rachel was still married to Reuven. And from the fact that the Mishnah didn't address that case, it deliberately avoided that case, implying that in that case the Yevamot is Eina Muteres, and Sarah would not fall for Yibum. Omer of Ashi, Zos Omeres, Yesh Zika, Filu Betray Achi. So what happens is, with the death of Levi, Sarah is, so to speak, quasi-married, if you will, to two men, so to speak. Again, this is all so to speak. Meaning, there's a zikas yibum between Sarah and both Reuven and Shimon. As a result of the death of Levi, there's now a woman who's kukal yibum to both Reuven and Shimon. Now, as a result of that zika of Sarah to both Reuven and Shimon, she gains the status now of a tzaras erva to Rachel. Now we understand very well, had Rachel been married, if her status would be that of a marriage relationship to Ruvain at the time that Sarah's Zika emerged, then we could understand very well that Sarah is now at Sarah's Erva. But Ruvain already had divorced Rachel before the Zika of Sarah came into existence, meaning before the death of Levi, the husband of Sarah. So let's go over Rav Ashi one more time. Rav Ashi is saying that from the diuk that we had in our Mishnah, we're going to derive that there's a Zika, even in a case of a Yevamot that falls in front of two brothers. Because as a result of the Zika that Sarah has as a Yevamot to both Ruvain and Shimon, she is considered the wife of Ruvain, who divorced Rachel, and therefore we make the whole cheshbon that if Rachel would have been alive and married to Ruvain at the time that Sarah fell for Yibum, they would certainly be tsaros, and therefore Sarah gains the status of a tsaros erva. Even though there are two brothers here, there's Ruvain and Shimon, and it's only a Zika. But yesh Zika, afilu betray achi. He writes here, Afal Gavsha Rachel, Achos Leah, Lo Hoisa Eshes Ruvain Bishah Shemes, Shekvar Girsha Kodam Lachet. Bir Haritva, Sherav Ashi Sava Kirabi Yirmiyah, Sheshas Nesuin Mapilas HaYevama Lifnei HaYavam. Bechol Shenasta Tzoras Erva Binisuela Nesra Liyabe. So the status of Erva here, as far as pattering up the Tzara, emerges at the moment of marriage. Meaning because because Shimon is married to Leah, the moment Reuven marries Rachel, Rachel already is endowed with the status of an erva from Shas Nesuin, even though she will no longer be in the picture of Yibum with a Zikas Yibum at the time of the Nefilah, because it's only after Reuven divorces Rachel that with the death of Levi, he, meaning Reuven, is miyabim Sarah. At that moment, Sarah is not sharing Reuven with another woman by the name of Rachel. But the answer is that Rachel's status as an erva generates halach of tsaras erva for anyone who will be married to this man, even if there'll be a divorce or she'll die, because from the suin, the shame erva, as far as being poter at Sarah, emerges. So the Gemara asks, Ula Rav Ashi, Kasha de Rav Nachman. Now we have to find an answer to the following question. Rav Nachman had a diuk in the Mishnah, not this Mishnah, but the previous Mishnah. And based on that diuk, he came to the conclusion that Ein Zika. And this is the top Mishnah on Daf Lamed Amud Aleph, on our Amud, where Reuven, Shimon, and Levi are brothers, Rachel and Leah sisters. Reuven marries Rachel, Shimon marries Leah, Levi marries Sarah, another woman who's not related. Reuven dies without any children. And Rachel falls for Yibam to Levi. She can't fall for Yibam to Shimon because Shimon's married to her sister Leah. And Levi does a mimer, and then he dies. And now Sarah and Rachel fall to Yibum in front of Shimon. And the Mishnah says that in this case, Cholektis v'lo misyabemis, and Rav Nachman is medayik from the Mishnah time of the Oved b'maimar, holo Oved b'maimar, nachris yibume nami miyabne. That the reason why there's chalitza, a blockage of yibum, is because of the maimar. In the absence of the maimar, Rav Nachman says, misyabemis. So there says Rav Nachman, we derive from this Ein Zika. Afil b'chadach. On the absence of Maimar, in this case, there would be Yibum. So it's only the Maimar, says Rav Nachman, and this we discussed in the previous year, that makes the Saras Erva relationship here. And that's why Shimon cannot be miyabem Sarah. She becomes a tzara to Rachel by virtue of the fact that Levi did a maimar on Rachel. So that Rachel is now Levi's wife by virtue of the maimar, and Sarah now falls for Yibum to Shimon. And Sarah, together with Rachel, with Saros, by virtue of Reuven's Maimar. In the absence of Maimar, then even though with the death of Reuven, Rachel falls for Yibum to Levi, we will not define and categorize Sarah, Eshes Levi, as a Sarah of an Erva, because Ein Zika. So we really have two diukim sotrim. We have a diuk of Rav Nachman in the Reisha, meaning in the first Mishnah on this Amud, to conclude that Ein Zika, and yet we derived here, says Rav Ashi, from our Mishnah on the bottom of Daf Lamed that Yesh Zika. Amar L'cha Rav Ashi, we derive from our Mishnah as we saw that Yesh Zika. It's impossible that therefore the previous Mishnah would have said Ein Zika. But then you have to ask the question that Rav Nachman asked, why does the Mishnah insist that Levi performed a maimar? Second, let's get the name straight. Correct, that Levi performed a maimar to Rachel, and then he died, such that now Rachel is at Sarah, or I should say it the other way around, Sarah is at Sarah to Rachel. Meaning Sarah and Rachel are both married to the same man, Levi. So when Levi dies, there's no Yibum possibility to Sarah, Shimon can't be miyabim Sarah because she's a Sarah's Ereva. So why do you introduce the Maimar? Why not just say Zika? Yesh Zika. Who did the Afagav the law of it be Maimar? Nachris Michlatz Cholza. Even without Maimar, so let's say Levi did not do a maimar to Rachel, Ashes, Reuven, but nevertheless, Levi's wife Sarah would still be a Tzaras Ereva by virtue of Zika, because with the death of Reuven, his wife Rachel fell for Yibum to Levi. And Levi's married to Sarah. So when Levi dies, then his kuka, namely Rachel, together with his wife Sarah, fall for Yibum to Shimon. And since Rachel is Zakuka, Sarah therefore gets the status of a Tzaras Ereva. Is he bume lo miyabe? So now Rav Ashi has to face the music, but v'hadik tani maimer. So why does the Mishnah insist on describing the scenario as one in which Levi did a maimar with Rachel Ashes Reuven after Reuven's death? Drop the ball on that. Just the very fact that Rachel fell for Yibum and that creates a Zika relationship to Levi, that makes Sarah, Levi's wife, into a Tzaras Ereva. The Mishnah wanted to add an extra chiddush. The Amri, Beit Shammai hold, here we'll take a look on Daf Lamed on base on the top line. Kinyan Gomer, that Maimar is Kona a Kinyan Gomer Minat Torah. And that means that it's Doche a Tzara Minayibum. That an erva who had a maimar now is considered knuyalo, such that her tzara is a tzaras erva according to the Torah law. And therefore, according to Beit Shammai, Sarah would be allowed to marry anyone without chalitza. She's a tzara to Rachel, the sister of Leah, the wife of Shimon, by virtue of Beit Shammai's halach that Maimer is a Kinyan Gomer. Kamash Malon Deloka Beit Shammai. The Mishnah wants to tell me that Sarah needs chalitza. even though Levi did a maimar with Rachel after the death of Ruvain, when Rachel fell for Yibum, nevertheless, she still needs chalitza. Why? Because Minat Torah, only Sarah is kuka l'Shimon. As a result of Misas Levi, and therefore she is not at Sarah's Erev at all. Wait, let's just understand that point. Sarah needs chalitza, even though we're holding Yesh Zika. Just 1 second. Holding Yesh Zika. And therefore, even without Maimar, again, if we add Beit Shammai, then Maimar is a Kinyan Gomur, and therefore Sarah is certainly at Sarah's Erva. But in the absence of Beit Shammai, and Maimar is not a Kinyan Gomur, then certainly Sarah needs Chalitza. I'm just trying to understand why Sarah certainly needs Chalitza. Even though Levi again gave a Maimar to Rachel. Mishum shemin Torah rak hi zekuka l'shimon liyavam. So why doesn't Rachel fall for Yibum together with Sarah, with the death of Levi? And the answer is because Levi was not Miyabim Rachel. And even if he did Maimar with Rachel, but we're going against Beit Shammai, Maimar is not Konik Kinyan government at Torah. So therefore, since there was never a marriage relationship between Levi and Rachel, therefore Sarah is not an Eshes, a Taurus Ereva. Okay. He has a picture. He says, Reuven v'Shimon v'Levi Achim, v'Rachel v'Levi Achios, Nasa Reuven es Rachel, Shimon nasa es Leah, Levi nasa es Sarah, Mes Reuven below Bada Nafla Rachel lifnei Achiv liyibum, the also Levi Maimer Baruch, who makes Levi below Banim, v'Nafla Sarah v'Rachel lifnei Shimon liyibum. Hare libeit Shammai hasovrim shemar koni kinyan gomur hamaimer shasel Levi berachel osa leishto gemura ukshemeis Levi nofeles nashuv le Shimon nifteres Sarah michalitza v'yibum mishum tsaras achos isha, and that would be the halacha according to Beit Shammai. But Mishnah Lafuki Beit Shammai, to exclude Beit Shammai, v'lomar shemaimar eino kona kinyan gomur, the ein Rachel nechsheves liishto shel Levi min haTorah, v'Sarah tzarasa chayeves bechalitza. The Rabbanan, she can't have Yibum. The only point that I'm still a little bit unsecure about is that initially we said that Reuven died, correct? And the moment that Reuven dies, his wife Rachel falls for Yibum to Levi. Why isn't that Zikas Yibum enough to make Sarah into a Tsaras Erva? Maybe this Gemara is holding that Yesh Zika is only D'Rabbanan. I don't know. Okay, so that's we're up to the top of Daf Lamed Omer.